Season 2, Episode 17, Roberto Salazar, Latin and Ancient Greek.
This is the Actual Fluency Podcast, helping you become a better language learner by providing motivating weekly inspiration, as well as top tips and tricks from expert guests. And now, your host, Chris Broholm.
All right, everyone, we're back with another Actual Fluency Podcast episode. And on this episode, I'm joined by my good friend, Roberto Salazar. And as you may remember, Roberto was on the podcast a few weeks ago talking about his own personal language learning story. And if you're interested about Roberto's backstory, go back and listen to that episode before you listen to this one, as there'll be some important backstory there. But today the topic is about Latin. And Latin has sort of seen a little bit of a resurgence recently, and we're going to talk much more about that in this episode. And I guess first order of business is, Roberto, how are you doing?
Hey, Chris, how are you? I'm great.
Fantastic. Melting, absolutely melting. It's like 35 degrees in Budapest, and yeah.
Here's a little bit better, but still, yeah. I'm waiting for autumn or winter or whatever, or the ice age to come
Ice
back.
age.
Yeah.
They're actually talking about that, aren't they? Like the next 10 years or so, mini ice age. That'll be nice. But anyway, going back to Latin here, without retelling your entire story from last episode, can you just let us know when you got introduced to Latin and when you sort of found out about it?
Yeah, sure. Well, I had, Latin is one of the languages I've been aware of for the longest time in my life. I mean, I was when I was a kid, I was studying at the French school in Colombia, and I had a friend who was studying Latin. She was older than I was, and she spoke about it all the time. And she told me, "Yeah, I love Latin. I'm studying Latin. I have a private teacher." And I tried to convince my mother to pay for private lessons, but it didn't work. So I was really frustrated because at the time I was fascinated by everything that had to do with the Roman world and also the Greek world. I mean, it was like I would have loved to learn Latin and Greek when I was like 5 or 6, and I had a Larousse dictionary. And in the Larousse dictionary, you had it's an illustrated dictionary, so you had like a list of Greek things, and among them was the Greek alphabet. So I just learned the names of the letters and hoped for something to happen, which never did. And then finally, when I got to the opportunity of studying it in high school, I didn't, because I chose German. So actually, I had dreamt. I dreamt about it. I had dreamed about it. I had wanted to study for a long time, but it didn't happen until I came to France, and then I decided to make it, my specialty. So I started studying Latin and Greek at what we call here an école prépa. And that was, I really studied it really intensively in a very scholarly way. Mm-hmm. And I started loving it. It was everything I had hoped for. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. A lot of times you hear about these language dreams, and when they come to fruition, sometimes they're not as you dreamt them.
Yeah, but it's like, I think you can never be disappointed with either Latin or Greek. It's just too big. It's a huge universe. You can get anything from it.
So just taking a quick break here to have a quick message from one of our sponsors, the Mello Method. When we come back, I really want to hear about why we should learn Latin or Ancient Greek in the first place.
Mello Method is the learning revolution since 1995. Now, you can make your dream of living your passion for languages real. Do you want a method that really teaches you a language? What if you could have your own school and get success teaching your students perfect lessons, 100% focused on conversation? Even if you have no experience, Mello Method will work where other methods can't. With Mello Method, you will overcome the speaking barrier from lesson 1. Jimmy Mello, the Brazilian polyglot, has created the best method to teach any foreign language. It's now available in 11 languages, from English to Spanish and Brazilian Portuguese, including Mandarin and Polish. Be a polyglot with Mello Method. Access right now, www.mellomethod.com, and reach your goals with Mellow Method, the best method ever created to teach and learn any language.
But let's get into that a little bit because
Yeah.
starting out,
Yeah.
would you equate their usefulness and what they provide to you as a person on the same level, or are there different advantages for each? Just before we get into that,
That's a very complicated question because, yeah,
I'm glad to hear
like
it.
for me, and in different countries like France or Germany, you usually study both together in either classics as a classics major or minor or whatever it is. You always learn both things because although the languages aren't that close, being in the European and stuff, they aren't that close. They're two separate language families. They share a common culture. So every time, I mean, the Romans learned Latin. Almost anybody who was anybody in Rome had to learn Greek. So the cultures are very similar. They're very different as well, but very similar and connected historically. So when you learn Greek and Latin together, you get like a complete view of Western and a part of Eastern antiquity. I mean, the ancient times, which basically gave us like a huge part of European culture. But both are very different languages, and the Greeks and the Romans were completely different people. So, and the languages have absolutely different feels. So why learn those languages? I mean, for me, it was just like a magical thing. I was fascinated. I loved it. They're both very complex languages. I mean, they were the most complex I had studied until then, and maybe still remain the most complex I've ever studied because they're very rich and there's a lot of cases, a lot of features that do not exist in some of the major European languages alive today. But and they can also have like they can be useful if you want. But I don't. The problem with Latin and Greek is you usually get like that, as you said, that question from people: why on earth? Why do you do that? And why should I learn Latin? And the problem is that everybody who has studied Latin or Greek is tempted to say, actually, they're useless languages, and that's one of the reasons why you should study them, because like either because they're languages of beauty and literature and culture is a means in itself, and it shouldn't be reduced to like socioeconomic factors or money or whatever, because you can earn a lot of money with I don't know, English or Italian or Chinese, but it's harder to earn money from Latin. Although I have earned not a lot of money, but some money from Latin besides, teaching.
Right, of course.
But it can be useful. I mean, people often say Latin is very important, and you should study Latin because it will help you learn Romance languages. And you could say the same thing for Greek. You should study ancient Greek as a kid to help you learn modern Greek later. Of course, the ratio is not the same. According to this theory, if you learn Latin, you'll be able to discover like 10 or 12 languages with the dialects, even more. Whereas Greek will allow you to learn one language, which is the thing we call modern Greek, although it's more or less the same. It's just the same language that has evolved. And maybe 2 or 3 dialects that are almost dead in 3 different parts of the world, which are also Greek dialects, but not the same as the main branch of modern Greek. And so yeah, sure. If you learn Latin, it can help you a lot. It's like the same thing that the Esperanto community says about Esperanto. Esperanto will help you with French and Spanish and other languages. Of course, Latin. Of course, I think if you want Esperanto to help you with your Spanish, you really need to learn Esperanto well, speak it well. Because if you just like dabble a little bit in Esperanto and then try to learn Spanish, it will not work. It will just have, maybe you would have learned like 2 words, and it will help you because the words will be the same in Spanish. But the same thing goes for Latin. You have to really get a good level, like good basis, in order for that to help you a lot with your languages. And of course, once you've studied a lot of Latin and you know grammar and you're more or less independent with an ancient text, the easiest ones, for example, well, you will know a lot of vocabulary, and it will help you indeed with French and Spanish and Portuguese, and of course, as you learn a lot of Greek roots through Latin, with Greek as well, and amazingly enough with English, because you know English is a Germanic language with a lot of French words, but with a lot of Latin words that didn't come through French as well. And there are a lot of words, when you speak, for example, French and you want to learn English, there are a lot of words of Latin roots that do not have that meaning in French, which are, I mean, the Latin meaning in French, but that do have that meaning in English. So that helped me a lot. For example, when I was learning Latin, because I learned English first and I already like more or less mastered the language when I started Latin. A lot of the English words helped me understand Latin. But had I really studied a lot of Latin before that, it would have been easier for me to understand all the Latinate, very complicated, very pretentious words in English. You know, like preposterous, pompous, and so on.
But isn't there a bit of a problem with learning Latin in general, is that it's quite difficult? Like the sort of vocabulary is, you know, what it is a vocabulary.
Yeah.
But the grammar, from my brief stint in Latin, about one semester, so it's quite brief, but from what I could tell, it was sort of quite difficult.
It is. I mean, it's not as, I wouldn't say it's difficult as much as it is complex. Doesn't mean that you have to. I mean, I would say, like, for example, Turkish grammar is easier to understand, but and it is very complex. But Latin grammar, although it's difficult to understand, it's easier to read for a normal European citizen speaks either, I don't know, Danish or Swedish or Spanish or German. It's easier to learn Latin than Turkish, because you can get to understand the language more easily. And I think one of the problems is that it's not really well taught. And
you don't have it for long either. Like I said, I had it for 6
Yeah.
months in high school, and
Right.
that's
Right.
not going to teach you anything, really.
No, of course not. Of course not. And that's one of the problems right now here in France. There's a reform going on, and Latin and Greek are slowly disappearing from our curriculum. So the problem is that we are keeping to the basics. We're learning like a little bit of etymology, a couple of words here and there. And although the argument for keeping up with Latin, for studying Latin in high school or I mean here in France you can study it for, I mean, in school for at least I think 3 years, and you can study it 6 or 7 years as a whole. And but the problem is that now we just want to keep to the basis and to the basics, and then try to, while at the same time saying that it's important to learn Latin words in order to be better in English or in French or in Spanish or whatever, although you're not really learning the language. And the problem is that even if you study it for 5 or 6 or 7 years, like it's often the case here in France, that doesn't mean you're going to really get to master the language, because the way it's taught gives you no independence at all. I mean, that's not the same in Germany, I guess. In Germany, people have better methods, I think, or in the United Kingdom, or even in the States. But in France, the problem is we're dependent. We're dependent on our dictionaries. We're always translating like literary texts and never worrying about basic communication skills, because it's a dead language. So we don't think. Well, I do, but people in general in France and teachers, and that's an old tradition, a really old tradition it's been going on for at least 70 years and maybe more, maybe 100, 200 years. So people think that it's impossible nowadays. It's impossible to learn to read Latin because Latin is too hard. So we're just going to learn a couple of words. We're going to learn the grammar, and then we're going to try and translate try and translate some texts with the dictionary in some limited time, and then you would say, I know Latin. But that wouldn't work. I mean, if you told a student, okay, German is impossible to learn. Now what we're going to do is you're going to learn a little bit of vocabulary. You're going to learn the grammar. Now take your dictionary and translate Goethe, or translate Dublin, or a very, very hard writer. It wouldn't have any sense. It wouldn't really make any sense, and people would never learn.
Yeah, that's preposterous, right? You would never imagine doing that with any other language.
Except,
but I guess it's just because of the dead status.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to just quickly refocus on.
Yeah, sorry.
People talking. When people are listening to this, I assume they're like language learners. They want to learn a lot of languages, or maybe just one language really well. What I'm really curious about is the investment into taking, let's say, I mean, how long would it take? I don't know. I hate this kind of question anyway, but let's take it would take you a year to get a really solid grasp in Latin, focusing on it as your main study.
Yeah.
Maybe it will take longer. Maybe it'll take, I don't know, 3 months if you're Benny Lewis. I don't know. But would the investment be worth it compared to just spending that time on your target language or other target languages? Would you say that the educational value and the value you can bring to learning new languages is great enough that it's worth doing? Because you say that we need a really good level of Latin to be able to enjoy the benefits of it, or at least the full benefits of it. But would you then advise people to learn Latin? The aspiring polyglots out there who I want to learn 10 languages and I'm on my second or something. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's a very good investment, because for one thing, it's hard. So you have to make some efforts. It's more or less like Russian, but if you're coming from English or a Romance language, or even from German, it's not going to be as hard as Russian because of the words, because of the vocabulary. Whereas Slavic language is going to be hard. You're going to have to memorize a lot of things, and Russian grammar is really complicated. Mm-hmm. It's not, I mean, Latin may or may not be more complicated than Russian, or the other way around. I'm not sure. Both are really complex. But the thing is, it all depends on what you want to achieve, and what you want to get from those languages. Of course, Latin is a language that's more interesting for people who like things like literature, or are interested in history, or philosophy, or even sciences, because it can help you understand better whatever it is you do in those fields. And it has a lot of very good touristic value, because you can always read, in at least in Europe, all the inscriptions all around the cities. So you will be really, if you have a date and you wanna impress this person, you just walk around this, for example, Berlin or Paris, reading all the Latin inscriptions, and be very, very, very amazing while doing it. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it depends. I think it's a matter of time. I mean, 1 year would be enough to have a general grasp of language, I think. Of course, not all the subtleties, but a general grasp. If you study Latin, let's say you study only Latin, or Latin and a second language, that would be enough to have a general grasp. Of course, then would come like the rote or not rote vocabulary learning, as in every language. But the thing is, and especially again, if you're coming from Latin languages or English, vocabulary will not be a problem.
Right.
And you will be able to guess a lot of different things, because the structure is close to that of some other languages, and the vocabulary is more or less the same. And once you've achieved a good level, not necessarily a very good and excellent level, or a good level, it will actually empower you. That's one of the amazing things about learning languages that are mother languages of other different of a whole family, for example. is that the thing is when you learn Latin roots, and not only roots and roots with the language and in the language, then you get a deeper grasp of the meaning of those Latin roots in all the languages you're learning, and you get a better grasp of construction patterns and structural patterns in the Romance languages, for example. You know what you get to understand perfectly why a prefix should have this meaning, why a word evolved from this meaning to that other meaning. So it really gives you a sort of power over language, and it allows you to understand language at a deeper level. Cool. I would say. And that happens with Latin and Greek, and it could happen as well with Sanskrit, which is also a very interesting language, older than Latin and Greek, more complex, and which could be also really useful when you're studying like Indian languages. But yeah, I think that's an important thing, that Latin gives you as a kind of depth that only a language that's 2,000 years old can give you. And that's the amazing thing. The other amazing thing is that you will never run out of materials to read. That's if you want to practice, go ahead. I mean, there's a lot of different things for all levels, written at all different times, and there's people who still write in Latin today.
I've seen the Harry Potter books in Latin.
Yeah, that's very fun. That's really fun.
Did you read them in Latin?
I haven't read them in Latin because I used to. I read I read like the first two books a long time ago, but I didn't. I just stopped liking them, so I didn't. Wait a second, sorry. So I didn't go for that. But I would love to read them because I think it can be very helpful for me as well, being as they're written in a more like in a simpler language.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very interesting anyway, and one other thing that I've noticed and why I said there was a bit of a rise in popularity lately with Latin is because I heard about not only the books that you're talking about, they're actually being written books. I read, one of my friends had a great book. It was a Latin professor from England who wrote a book where he translated really trendy English sayings to Latin. So like, nice ass, you look great in that, or some stupid phrases like that, and they were quite popular. And it's like a book you can put in your toilet or something to read while you're in there. But at the end of the day, it shows that there is some kind of renewed interest, and I always hear about it in the polyglot community. I hear about people speaking about Latin and also talking about learning it. And I know you also speak Latin.
Yes.
And I guess that's a very important distinction to make, is that most people don't learn to speak Latin, which you pointed out a few minutes ago. But that's what they're trying to do now, right? Isn't it? The sort of And can you tell us a little bit about the opportunities to actually speak Latin right now?
Sure. There's a lot of things. I mean, Latin is a language that, contrary to what everybody believes, it's a language that's never actually died. I mean, of course, there's no or almost no native speakers of Latin today, but there were for a long time. I mean, I guess early into the early 20th century, there would have been a couple of families where children grew up speaking Latin. It was very limited, but it was still practiced at some point. And it's a language that has never been has always been spoken in a more educated way. Of course, it's not. You wouldn't go buy groceries in Latin today, although you could, but that doesn't happen. But still, it's a language that's practiced as a spoken one, and I think that's the best method. And I was telling you earlier that I did my very basic. Like the first steps I made in Latin were in a very classical, very French, following. I mean, very French steps according to a method that's really only written stuff and reading and learning grammar and memorizing vocabulary lists and stuff. And but the moment I started really making progress was when I met a guy, an American actually, who now leads a very interesting institute for which promotes spoken ancient languages. And this guy organized a spoken Latin seminar at our school, at our university here in Paris. And so I came I think it was every Monday to the school. We met, we're a group, there were maybe 10 of us, and we read Latin texts in Latin, and we tried to speak, and we tried to paraphrase complex texts and build easy sentences from complicated sentences, and that helped a lot. And then slowly I became more and more convinced that you had to speak Latin to really master it. Of course, it's not really a must, but it's better if you start Latin through the spoken method. You will get like a more intuitive approach to it, and you will be reading it maybe not in no time, but really faster than you would have if you just kept to grammar and books. And today, so as for the opportunities of speaking Latin, there are a lot of things. I would say in almost every country, there's I have a friend who is the director of the Latin Circle of Paris, and there's a lot of different Latin circles all around the world. There's at least 10 in Italy, like 4 in Spain. There's, I think, 2 in France. There's 1 in Belgium. There used to be 1 in Colombia, and there are a lot of different Latin circles in the United States, in England. And so these are very informal circles where people meet to just practice the Latin skills, and they communicate in Latin all the time. And there's also a mailing list I'm a part of. I don't write that often, but I receive emails in Latin almost every day. And there's at least 150 people reading that every day. So it's not a huge community, but it's an important community anyway. And for the last like 20 years, there's been like a second, or I would say a second Latin revolution, which has been led by people in Belgium and in Italy, and now there are a couple of schools where everything's done in Latin and Greek, and you can learn Latin and Greek in Latin and Greek. You can study literature in Latin and Greek, you can study history in Latin and Greek. So, and that really helps a lot. And when you see these guys are amazing, and they have a level of ancient languages that can be matched by almost anybody. They're really good. Mm-hmm. And these people make the impossible possible. They can just read ancient texts with no problems, things that appear absolutely impossible for anybody. But as the director of this Italian school, whose name is Luigi Miraglia, once put it, it's why should Latin be more complicated than German? And how come people can learn more or less fluent German in 3 years at the Goethe Institute or whatever, and not Latin? How come people do that, and how come people study for 6, 7, 8 years Latin and Greek and are not even able to decipher a simple text? And so it's just a matter of method. It's just you have to speak it, you have to use it, you have to put it in context. You have to learn how to build the structures intimately, because the language is not just one of the arguments of people defending Latin all the time is that it's a very rational language, and I think people confuse cases and grammatical complexity with reason. It doesn't have anything to do with rational thought. It's just cases. They're not more rational. They are more rational than analytic languages, but. The Latin is not more intellectual or more rational than other languages. It's if not, it's just a language that should be spoken and felt. So it's not a matter of reason; it's more a matter of a felt experience.
Right.
And if you get that felt experience from Latin and Greek, then you will be able to get everything from them, and there's a lot of things to get from that culture.
Cool. And
Yeah.
what about pronunciation? Because
Yeah.
I guess there are no tape recordings from ancient Rome.
No,
where we
unfortunately not.
listen to
For-
how people actually spoke. So how did you, or how did the Latin speakers of today come up with the pronunciation
Yeah.
that they have?
So that's like the tragedy of my life. I think if really, I swear, if I could just have one wish, well, maybe not, but yeah, I think what if I could really get something, because I don't care. I mean, money. Maybe I can get some money. I can survive with what I have. It's not much, but that wouldn't be the thing I would ask. I would ask to go there to be. Both in Athens in the 5th century BC and in Rome in the 1st century BC, and listen to people and listen to how they spoke, and just have a tape recorder or I don't know, my phone, and just record them speaking, and just keep that and learn to speak with them, and learn how they spoke, because that's a matter of debate, and it has never stopped. I mean, everybody talks about it all the time, and in academic circles, and yeah, well, we have a pretty good idea of what it was. Depending on
Is there an agreed standard, or is it different if you're a Latin speaker from America or France or Italy?
No, there is an agreed standard, but that doesn't mean you have to use it. I mean, there is an agreed reconstructed pronunciation.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's more or less like more or less like Esperanto. I mean, everybody speaks it more or less with their accent.
Yeah. But it's cool. Yeah.
But actually, the thing is, so everybody speaks it with their accent, but there is an official reconstructed pronunciation that has been reconstructed through scientific method. I mean, by looking at books where the Romans told us how they pronounced in a very I mean, it's not very linguistically significant, because it's hard to know what they meant when they say like R. The R is pronounced like the noise made by a dog, by a snarling dog. Yeah, so it can be almost anything.
Yeah.
But we have a pretty good idea of what it was, and then the evolution. I mean, the historical phonetics allow us to deduce more or less what it would have been from comparisons between modern languages. I mean, we know that this pronunciation of C in Spanish corresponds to this pronunciation of C in French and Italian, and that means that it must have been pronounced as this phoneme. And then you have like documents written by people at the time, and then you have all the mistakes they could have made. For example, a good source are all the graffiti left by the Romans in Pompeii and other ancient cities, where you see how the lower classes who didn't have access to a very good education would write some of the words. So then, from the spelling mistakes, you can more or less know what the sound was like.
Wow. It's pretty
Yeah,
fascinating.
it's amazing. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. It's absolutely fascinating, and it's an incredible world, and it's incredibly close to us, and also incredibly far from our reality. So that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons Latin is so interesting, and maybe much more interesting for European people, non-Greek European people, than Greek, because there are a lot of words that mean a lot of different things for us. And then when we look at the original meaning of those words, it's fascinating to see how they've changed, and to what they referred to in like 2,000 years ago. And sometimes to see that the words have had absolutely no change in 2,500 years or something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, yeah, and in Greek it's even worse, because to a Roman ear, like a French ear or a Spanish ear, Greek words sound really fancy, like very complex, like metaphor, for example. Metaphor in modern languages, it's a poetic figure. It's poetry. But if you go to Greece, metaphor means transportation. So, and that's the same thing for all the words in of Greek origin, because they belong to the higher culture of the time. So they were transmitted with this feeling of superiority. And now when you go, but it happens as well with modern Greek. But now when you go to Greece, when you learn ancient Greek, you see how those words that seem very, I don't know, pretentious to us, are actually very plain words in another ancient language. Yeah, it's really cool.
Cool. And now, I guess for the final question before we both pass out from heat stroke, if people listening to this are probably like, okay, I'm so pumped, I love the sound of this, it sounds amazing, I'm gonna go learn Latin right now. What would be your top 5 tips for people who are gonna go learn Latin right after this?
Yeah, sure. Well,
or
the first
7
thing
or 3, whatever comes to mind.
yeah, I mean, the first thing would be to, well, stay motivated, because it can be hard. Not necessarily, but it can be hard. You really have to get good materials, and you have to get materials that are not only directed to people who just want to read. So you will have to get a good grammar, but not too complicated. Like in French, there's a lot of different things, and in Amazon you can just look them up, and there's a lot of easier stuff you can begin with. So that's for the written part, and then you should have a book like Conversational Latin for Oral Proficiency, which is a very good book. I don't remember the author, but it's Conversational Latin for Oral Proficiency. And if you speak French or German or Italian, you can get the Asimo method, of which there are 2 versions. Like in French, there's an older version which is really good. Like it's called the Desessart method. It's an Asimo one, but it was written by Desessart, and which is really good. And then there's the other one, like 2005 version, which is really not that good. It's a lot of mistakes in it. And it's been translated into German and Italian. And if you buy, it will be released again, the older version in French, because the other one wasn't that good, in September this year. And my voice will be in it, so it's really cool. So if you want to listen to me speaking Latin, you can get that. But you can just get the book. I think you can download it from, I don't know where you can find it.
No, of course, get the full book set. Of course, get the CDs as well.
Get the CDs as well.
Support the company.
Exactly. No, but and then now there's just so many different cool resources online, like on YouTube. Just look for Latinum, like Latin with UM at the end, and there's a guy who for free just gives you a lot of tips, reads text for you with a very good accent, restore pronunciation and all. And a very good website would be www.textkit.com, I think. TextKit, and there you have hundreds of materials. And if you just want to really the last thing would be, do not only use recent materials. Latin has been, and Greek as well, have been taught for centuries. So the best methods were written in the 16th, 17th century, and you just gotta Google that in Google Books, and look for like the works of Erasmus or the works of Juan Luis Vives, or just look for like Renaissance manuals and stuff. Some of them are translated, and it can really be of great help, and sometimes much better than the modern stuff, which is not that good, because people like Erasmus had an incredible mastery of Latin, whereas people today are really good, but not as good as he was. He had studied Latin all his life, so that's not the same thing. So those, I would say, like both written texts and oral approaches, and then a combination of modern scholarship and Renaissance or older books. That's like the winning combination.
Cool. And of course, you'll be at the various polyglot gatherings around
Yeah,
Europe. So if people want to practice some Latin or ask you questions about Latin,
yeah.
they can just come up and say "saluton" or "servus" or whatever the word is.
It's you can say like salve, salve.
So,
Most people, a lot of people say salve because of again, this is one of the pronunciation changes. V, it depends on the country. Restore pronunciation would be salve. Italian pronunciation, ecclesiastical pronunciation would be salve, and but yeah, that and just look it up in your city, in your hometown. There must be, if you live in a pretty big city, there must be a Latin circle. So if you're interested in listening to it, in meeting people who want to speak it, do it. And if you already speak Latin but you haven't found anybody to speak with, try and create your own Latin circle. Like go on Meetup and write something like Latin circle. I'm looking for people to practice my Latin. I mean, I think it's really good because one of the things about Latin is that there's no like ideology or no central unique theme or thematic. People have very different expectations, and some people learn it because I once met a guy who had just been learning something. It's my phone. Sorry.
so unprofessional.
I'm sorry. It was
okay.
far. It was not. It was not here. It was far from me, and it's just starting ringing.
It's okay.
Uh,
The production value of the show isn't that high
I'm
anyway.
really
So
sorry. No, but it happens to very important people as well. So I would just say that. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
I'm such a busy man that I couldn't just not have my phone on me.
it always
Sorry.
rings during recording too. Like it's probably hasn't rung for like 8 hours, but now it goes off. That's what usually happens to me. I won't get a call for days, and then the hour I'm doing the recording, it'll ring. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, it's really cool to sort of get into this Latin, and I
Yeah.
hope that we answered some of people's questions and curiosities about Latin, and hopefully we can inspire some people to look into it. I know
I hope
personally
so.
that for me, time is not right now for Latin, but
Sure.
I'm definitely not uh, against the possibility of doing it in the future for sure.
Right. That would be great. That would be great. And yeah, no, you really, yeah. I mean, I'm not. I really. Oh. And yeah, I mean, I just. It's a very open. It's a very open language. It can welcome anybody, and you can. It's not. You can just learn it to the point of your own satisfaction. I mean, it doesn't. If you just want to know some etymology, it's really good. If you wanna speak Latin, it's really great. If you just want to read it, you can do that too. It's language that is so rich that you can just have very different goals. It's not just about communication. It's not just about traveling. It's not
Right.
just about culture, and it's not just about linguistics. It can be a really good tool for a lot of different things.
It's not all or nothing, you mean? You don't have to become totally fluent to gain any
Right,
benefit
right.
from it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you want to get fluent, that's my objective. I couldn't live without being fluent in Latin, and I'm still not at a point where I can say like I understand everything I read because it's a complex language
Of
and
course.
it's an old language and it changes a lot in different according to different times. But I'm pretty high up there. But there are a lot of people who just learn it for fun because they like the challenge, because they like cases, because they want to they want to understand more about culture, because they're really into inscriptions and they really want to impress people when they're traveling around Europe, you
Right.
know.
Well,
For example, if you don't want to learn Polish, but you want to understand something in Poland, there are lots and lots of inscriptions.
the
So,
top
and I
tip.
guarantee, yeah, and I guarantee that Latin is easier than Polish if
Well,
except if
there you
you're
go.
like Russian or Czech. But yeah,
Awesome. Well, it's so cool, man. Thank you so much for coming on again to
yeah. Thank you
share
for
your
the
passion
invitation. It was
for
very fun.
Latin, and I'm sure I'll see you soon somewhere.
Hopefully, yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to Berlin next month, but I don't know if you'll be there.
Oh no, I'm permanently in Budapest now, so
No, but I mean traveling. One never knows.
one never knows. That's true. No, I'll be in New York for October. That's
Oh,
my
oh
next
yeah,
goal.
absolutely,
Are
absolutely.
You planning? Or
Would love to. I don't know. I don't think I'll have the money. Maybe. I'm still waiting for something to come up. I don't know yet,
it
but I
is
would.
expensive for sure. I mean,
It's
traveling
expensive,
to
and I don't know if I'll. Yeah, I don't know if I'll have the time to go there at that moment. Exactly.
Well, I hope
But
I hope you'll find the time and the money for it because
And if not, I'll hope there will be Latin speakers in New York. I mean, there are, but at the conference.
right, yeah, that could be a lot of fun too. But all right, I think I'm gonna go stick
Yeah.
my head in the fridge and
Go ahead, go ahead.
I'll talk to you later. And thank you so
Yeah,
much.
sure. Thank you. It was absolutely amazing. I love speaking about Latin.
I can tell. I can tell.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast.